Morning, everyone. It's a beautiful morning here in Santa Barbara. It's funny because, weather is one of those things everyone always sort of talks about to get the sort of as an icebreaker in a conversation. And I guess instinctively I've done it here too. But it's such a silly thing to talk about in Santa Barbara because it's usually so beautiful. Has been a little windy, but other than that, it's another beautiful day in Santa Barbara. Okay, well. So we had readings on the Green New Deal this week, and we also had little short video clips on the Green New Deal. And as a consequence, when doing my little opening lectures and getting you to talk about things, it seemed redundant to have both the video on the reading and the video on the little documentaries. It seemed redundant to have them both on the Green New Deal. So for this one, I titled it, I'm reading here, Social Justice, Environmental Justice, Climate Justice, and the Injustice of It All. Because we haven't really gotten to square on the notion of climate justice, environmental justice, and the Green New Deal is an excellent time to do that. So it's kind of a segue into the conversation. And also, it's good to talk about sort of the limits of the Green New Deal. So what I mean by that is what I mentioned in the talk is that the Green New Deal is a U.S. idea. It's all about the U.S., with one little exception, and a perceptive student in her class drew attention to it, and I have the comment that'll be a segue to that. But for the most part, it's a U.S. kind of thing. And in the climate of the U.S. now, we're very nationalist in a way. We elected a president who, wanted to build a wall around the country, or at least, the southern part of it, and sort of close us in from the rest of the world, and pulled back, funding to other parts of the world, including Bangladesh, which is my example that we'll be talking about here. So in a nationalist time like this, it's not surprising that the proposal being put forward is going to try to just sell it on Americans. But the problem is that, this is a global issue. And that's why the distinction between environmental justice and climate justice is a good one. So we've been through this before, but I'll just do it again very quickly. Environmental justice is, on the one hand, a larger rubric, a bigger category that would include climate justice in it. But often environmental justice focuses on specific issues, specific places, like a factory going up into town and potential problems there if it's, polluting the water or the ground there. Environmental justice should include everything. It can, but often it refers to those sort of things, which we often call point source pollution, because there's a pinpointed source, a source of the pollution. But climate justice is, of course, bigger because the issue is, and by the way, of course, why this is a justice issue rather than just a pollution issue is that it is going to impact the people that live around those factories. And historically, what's happened with pollution sites, with point source pollution issues, is that they are built in communities that are underprivileged. And the reason for that is it's easier to sell them there because, the idea is, well, that factory is going to come with jobs. You have this, depressed area, and look, we're going to build a great factory. It's going to have jobs. Everyone's going to be happy. The problem is, of course, pollution comes with them. This came into relief, I think, a few years ago, not that many years ago, when they were proposing putting a new power plant in the area here. And it was going to be a natural gas-fired power plant, so relatively clean, but still an issue. So where would they put that in this area here? Are they going to put it in Santa Barbara, wealthy Santa Barbara, maybe Montecito? No, that's not going to happen. So the proposal was to put it down in Oxnard, which is south of here. If you're not familiar, it's below Ventura. And Oxnard is largely an agricultural area, at least was, I think probably still pretty much is, but not as wealthy as Santa Barbara or Montecito. And then the idea was, well, that's the community that's most likely to take it. And if you think about that, what a sad commentary that is, because the rationale is, those people have to take it, right? I mean, by the way, they didn't have to take it, and they didn't approve it in Oxnard. But the hope is that those people have to take it. Those people need the money, and they will, make that exchange. And that's an exchange that no one should have to make. But it is unfortunately the way environmental justice works. And of course, when we say it, what we're really saying is environmental injustice, right? These are social justice issues. And justice, by the way, in this context, usually refers to human justice. You can say there's an injustice to other species, animals, and all. But in this case, it really refers to the injustice to human beings caused by it. Climate justice is also an injustice, as we've seen. We've gone through it a lot, to human beings, because not everyone is going to, well, it's a twofold thing. Not everyone is going to suffer the same. Some people are going to suffer more, and not everyone is as responsible. So there's an injustice there, right? So someone who is more responsible should suffer more, and yet the great irony in this situation, the people who are most responsible will, for the most part, suffer the less, and the people least responsible will suffer more. That's a great injustice. That is the core injustice of climate justice. That's how it works. Countries like the U.S. have benefited most, will suffer least in the sense that we have the resources to protect ourselves. We can Santa Barbara, if it starts flooding, we can call in the Army Corps of Engineers and create all sorts of, I don't know what things along the coast to keep the flooding from happening. But, they cannot do that in Bangladesh. They don't have anywhere near those sort of resources. So that's why this is a justice issue. Now, the Green New Deal wants to make sure that these injustice problems are addressed, which is why it's so heartening, and on the other hand, why it received certain criticism, because why isn't it just talking about windmills and solar? Why is it talking about making sure that people have good working conditions and a fair wage and things like that? Because we have to do that too. But the limit of the Green New Deal, for the most part, is that it doesn't talk about the rest of the world, because, again, we are a big part of the problem. We need to think about shouldering the responsibility of that with the rest of the world. And that's where something called the Global Marshall Plan, which I talked about, comes in. And I don't think I mentioned that little video. Remarkably, that was introduced 30 years ago, that idea that we should do that. And it was introduced by Al Gore. And Al Gore actually, so that was the book that comes out of, Earth in the Balance is the name of the book. A great title, right? I mean, we could say the same today. Earth is in the balance. Gore was way ahead of the curve, on the right side of history on that one. And certainly even before that, as early as the 70s, he was talking about climate change in Washington and why we needed to do something. And in part, he ran for president in 1988, and that was part of his platform, that he wanted to do something about climate change back in 88. And then again, he ran again and actually won, although history wasn't very fair to him there. He won in 2000, but of course, he didn't actually win, in the sense that, George W. Bush, the son of George Bush, who was president previously, became president. So Gore, anyhow, was way ahead of the curve, thinking about this Marshall Plan for the Earth and how we could help the rest of the planet. But let's jump right in, and we can look at some of these comments, which are absolutely terrific. So there's our title. Yeah, change must occur soon rather than later. In his lecture, Ken compares the United States to less developed countries like Bangladesh, and some specific statistics that were absolutely mind-boggling. First, the average American in the U.S. eats an estimated 6,600 times more meat than those people living in Bangladesh. It's rather amazing. I could have done this with a number of things. I just pulled some things out and compared them and ran the numbers. Meat industry, an enormous part of harmful emissions that are released into the atmosphere, adding to warming the globe. Additionally, the per capita air travel in the United States is roughly 14,000% higher than Bangladesh. With staggering differences like these, it's no surprising that the United Nations was one of the biggest global polluters. In order to have any possible chance at combating climate change, the United States must go through an era of degrowth, a time when Americans must learn how to live in a more sustainable way rather than continuing their environmental or detrimental daily activities. Yeah, that idea of degrowth, an important notion. And I have to tell you right now, this is one of the central problems that we're faced with respect to the climate crisis. And what I mean by that is, there have been times when the economy has gotten smaller or wasn't growing as quickly. The two big ones in recent memory are the Great Depression back in the 20th century and the Great Recession, initiated in 2008. During those times, the economic growth slowed significantly, but tons of people were without jobs, and it was a very difficult time. The economy is built on growth and this sort of unending, continuing, growing. When it doesn't grow, as traditional economists will tell you, then there's a problem. That's a sign that the economy is not healthy. It's thought of like a living organism, and people suffer at those times. That's true. That's why something like during the Minimalism Week, we had that little short, which I talked about, even if you didn't get a chance to see it. And if you didn't get a chance to see it, you might want to go back and see it. And it was called A Plenitude Economy. And Juliet Schor is the scholar who put that forth. And it's really just suggesting that, you could have an economy where it didn't have as many jobs. And how would that work? She doesn't quite, in that little video, it doesn't really say it, but, there are places, and I use the example again and again of Denmark, where, okay, we're going to lose these jobs and people who are working like 60 hours a week will be without jobs and all. But what if you split that job into two and you have two people working 30 hours a week, which is the average work week like in Denmark? Suddenly you could have, as much, you could get as much done, even though there wouldn't be a need for as many hours, but more people could do it because people would be working less hours. Potentially you would, of course, have less less money, individuals would. But then, of course, maybe we don't need as much as we have to buy those 60-odd items of clothing every year. I know I've simplified that, and I know and I know there are economists in the class who are probably cringing, but it is a challenge, and it's a huge one to figure out how to make this work, because our economy, coming out of the so-called Industrial Revolution, technological modernity itself, has been built on growth, and that's something we have to figure out how to do, and that's why I suggested these sort of personal changes to individual actions, because it's a way of thinking about having less, doing with less, and all. And Thoreau would be like sort of the great-grandparent of arguing for degrowth on a personal level, that we just all, work less, have less, and enjoy life more. That would be the idea, but it is a real challenge, and this person, I know I noted that in my talk, but this person focusing in on it really got right to the heart of the challenge there. Okay, let's move on. So that is the question, and I raised them, whether the United States has a responsibility to help countries such as Bangladesh mitigate the socio-economic, and environmental disasters our country has caused. Well, let me just pop back on. There it is. Do we have a responsibility to the rest of the world? As this person rightly notes, lining it up here, the social, economic, and environmental disasters caused by the U.S. for other parts of the world, and Bangladesh is our example, but there are nearly 200 other countries on the planet. We could talk about a lot of them, most of them. Do we have that responsibility? And that is the question. I mean, that's a moral question, whether we do or not. So this person will answer that immediately for us. I believe that the United States absolutely has a moral responsibility to aid Bangladesh and other developing countries and the rest of the world in moving toward a cleaner future. Over the past few years, especially, I felt that the sense of nationalism and patriotism in the United States has outweighed the compassion and empathy we should have for other human beings on the planet. While people's feelings of pride for their country is great, I don't believe that it should be placed ahead of caring for other people in other countries. While America is focused on maintaining our strong economy, making revolutionary technological, medical, scientific advancements, we fail to realize the impact that our actions are having on the rest of the world. I believe that the Green New Deal needs to include specific ways in which America can aid countries which we have harmed, such as plans similar to the Global Marshall Plan created by Al Gore in 1992. I added that 1992 just so you knew there. But really, this person, I'm going to just get to the right here, the United States has outweighed the compassion and empathy. A sense of nationalism and patriotism has outweighed the compassion and empathy we should have for other human beings on our planet. I think that expresses it better than I could have. I mean, the idea of nationalism, patriotism, you see flags a lot, in the last few years, and people are all about how great America is or how great it was and how great we're going to make it again or whatever. But it's America, America, America. And that's great, as this person said. It's good to feel good about your country. But, this person argues that this has outweighed the compassion and empathy we should have for other human beings on our planet. I'm going to read that again because it's just perfect. It has outweighed the compassion and empathy that we should have for other human beings on our planet. Well, that's it, right? And the tragedy playing out on our southern border, and you've seen this with children separated from their parents in horrible conditions. I mean, where's compassion? Where is empathy for other human beings? I mean, from my point of view as a parent, seeing this tragedy with children and all. I mean, where's the empathy? Where's the compassion? So what's so great about this particular comment is, we could address this in a very practical way, right? In a really practical way, saying, well, if they emit CO2 in Bangladesh, we're going to suffer too. And, wherever it's emitted or whatever greenhouse gases go up, we're going to suffer. So we need to do it to resolve this problem. That would be pretty selfish, right? If you looked at it just that way, because you're saying, I want my planet to not have a problem with, because of the climate crisis, and wherever the problem could occur, we need to resolve it because that impacts me. I care about that because it impacts me. But this person is taking another tact, right? It's a different one. It's a more basic human one regarding compassion and empathy. And should we feel that, and should we act on that? And this person says, absolutely we should. One of the reasons, I showed you something like the True Cost. And I think one of the reasons the True Cost was made the way it was made was to draw attention to that lack of empathy and compassion, often because we're just not aware of it, right? I mean, we've been through all this, the clothing industry, all these industries, they're designed to protect us from that. They don't want us to see that because they're afraid that our basic, human, feelings of empathy and compassion will kick in, and we won't buy that particular product, or we'll ask them to change the way they're doing things in a way that might hurt their profit. But this, the idea here is, though, and I think we need to confront it, that there is, the injustice here is so great, and it's on a basic human level. of compassion and empathy. And in a way, I mean, if all this and these injustice issues come down to a lack of empathy, right? Because, so go back to my example here, do I in Santa Barbara want electricity that's produced because the power plant was built in somewhere else, or someone else is going to have the problems that comes with it? I mean, why would I want that for myself when a family, down there is experiencing, hardship because of it? I mean, I wouldn't want that. I mean, the ideal thing would be to have, clean power that's not going to hurt people that way. The ideal thing would be to have a win-win where, people benefit by building the power and installing it and all that. That's what I should want, and I shouldn't want anything for anyone else that I wouldn't want for myself. And I think if you held the world to, if you held your actions to that standard, and by the way, that is a basic principle of morality, right? I mean, Immanuel Kant's, categorical imperative. This is philosophy I'm talking about, which is, that you wouldn't want to do anything if that action was, universalized, which is called universal imperative, universalized so that everyone would do the same. So, would I want to kill someone? No, because if everyone else did that, I could get killed. Would I want, to do anything that would, harm someone else because it would ultimately harm me? It's in Kant's way of formulating it, it's a selfish thing, but it just comes down to the idea of, is doing this just and fair to everyone else? Would you want this done to you? And the answer to that, I think, is no. But I hope it's no. But again, you wouldn't quite know that from recent events regarding our nationalism and the way that we interact with the rest of the world, because people are going to talk about something I mentioned in the. But let me let you talk, and by way of the comments. So, I'm going to continue with this person's comment once I have a little tea here. We need to ensure the countries around the world that have suffered due to our actions and are at the center of our efforts. We need to address this. Ensuring economic security for Americans during this process of growth is extremely important, but cannot be placed above the health and well-being of people in other parts of the world as well. I strongly believe that we need to work together, not to dominate, work together with, not dominate, the leaders of developing countries to establish goals that serve the interests of the planet as a whole, and in the climate crisis as a global, not national issue. I put a lot of this comment here because it's so good. This is a global, not national issue. Nationalism is inappropriate here. It's okay. Nationalism can be okay, right? This person earlier on, it's great to have pride in your country. I agree. But this is a global issue, and we have to address it globally, think about it globally, work with other countries to do it, which is what something like the Paris Agreement is designed to do. What, the COPs have been, including COP21, where that one was signed, the countries of the world have gotten together and say, how can we work on this together? That was a start. As we've noted, it's not adequate in many respects, but it was a start. And we need to continue doing that and working, with the rest of the world. And the U.S. has to do that as well. That's my belief anyhow. So let's continue and go down here. Yeah, Texas. I talked about this last time when I was talking about the Green New Deal specifically. 13 million people are still without clean running water, and millions are without electricity. I think this was comment made a little bit ago. It is improving a little, but still, it is in fact so heartbreaking to know that the majority of these people without resources are of low-income families, and electricity companies are prioritizing the lives of the richest. This is the epitome of environmental racism that should not exist in a country that preaches equality and freedom. I find the Green New Deal fundamental in holding the U.S. accountable for its passive and detrimental economic values, such that Americans and every other life form benefit. As said in the resolution, is the duty of the federal government, said in the resolution. So the Green New Deal says it's the duty of the federal government to practice what they preach and ensure that the national threat, that is climate crisis, is under control. Yeah. So we're just talking about this sort of globally with the idea of a global Marshall Plan and all, but also let's not forget that the inequity exists in the U.S. That there are injustices here, climate justice problems here, and something like what's happening in Texas right now, where people who are without resources have the biggest problem. If people have a lot of money, and I wasn't going to say it, but I'll just say, there is a member of Congress in Texas, apparently, who saw the problem and decided to get on a plane immediately and fly to Cancun, a resort, so that he and his family didn't have to deal with it. I don't want to talk about that as an individual thing. You've probably heard enough about it. But in a way, boy, doesn't that epitomize the problem here? In other words, there's a huge problem. It's caused by the changing climate. And wealthy people, what can they do? They can, immediately get a flight, pay more for that flight, fly down there to a resort, pay, for, an expensive, hotel for as long as necessary. That's the problem. I mean, that's the problem in a nutshell. Not everyone will suffer the same. When the suffering, when it starts, people have no choice. There's 13 million people, as this person rightly noted. A great many of them. What could they do? They are in houses without running water. They're without electricity when it's exceptionally cold. People are dying by the dozens, and other people can just leave the problem. And yeah, I mean, morally, we can't leave the problem, right? That's it. So anyhow, the idea here is that we need to address these sort of inequities, and yet these inequities are, it's not like they're hypotheticals. They're happening right now in Texas. So, yeah. Let's see. Pause the video. So the statistic that I mentioned regarding loss of life and homes in Bangladesh is astonishing. I was struck by it. I paused the video and rewound it several times to make sure that I heard you right. 5,000 lives lost per year, 6 million homes, and even more in some cases. How could that be allowed to happen? And my gut reaction was, why am I here learning about this when I could be there on the ground, actually helping those impacted by the flooding? 5,000 people every year. 9/11 happened 20 years ago. 2,000 lives were lost. And in response, the U.S. has committed unimaginable crimes under the pretense of maintaining the peace. How can a country that attempts to hold itself above others? So let me just back up and go over this. Yeah, I mean, the fact is we're just not aware of these things, like the flooding of Bangladesh, that loss of life that comes every year. I mean, so we're mortified, and we should be mortified at what's happening in Texas now, where I said dozens of lives are being lost. But every year, thousands of lives, and some years many more than that are being lost, and it's only getting worse. That's the problem. So, like as the person said, I mean, which is the proper empathetic response? Why am I here listening and talking about this? Why aren't we there trying to help? I mean, that is the knee-jerk empathetic human response. Now, we can all, go to Bangladesh to help, but we can, back to the same thing, put politicians in office like Al Gore 30 years ago, who wanted to do that using the collective power and economic strength of the United States to help everyone. Now, of course, you may not go along with that because you may say, I want to, build walls around the country and I don't care about everybody else. I'm America first. Well, if you care about America, you should do that too. And if we would have done that 30 years ago, I don't know that these problems we're having right now, including the ones in Texas, would be nearly as severe. So let me go back to this comment, though. Where do we pick up? one that claims to be the best country on earth, and that is the claim often made, the United States, we're the best country, and one that is the richest country stands utterly by in the face of such loss of life. In fact, we are not just watching and doing nothing. We are getting a couple kicks in and throwing some kerosene on the fire that is this flooding. So in other words, we're aggravating it, making it worse because of what we're doing. Our and uneducated minority continue to elect charlatans that act as if they care about them when they really care about the corporate interests that make their Cancun getaway a possibility. There's that Cancun getaway again. I am truly fuming, and I worry this is a jumble of unconnected thoughts. It's not, don't worry. Really, my takeaway is the U.S. has no right to be considered a world leader, and in fact, in the wake of the Trump era, is not a world leader when we allow such events to happen and do nothing to avoid them. It's a great way to look at it, and don't worry, it wasn't a jumble of thoughts. But what makes us a world leader? In other words, a group of people in the room, one emerges as a leader. What makes that person a leader? Is it that they've managed to aggregate and take most of the resources for themselves and, have more wealth than the other? Don't know that's what makes a leader. A leader is leading the rest, coming together and working for the rest. By the way, you may hear a little sound. My chicken over there is making noises for some reason. So if you hear something in the background, that's the chicken. I actually have a little damper behind my mic, and I moved my mic, so maybe it's not a bigger problem. But if you hear a chicken, that's what's intruding there. But yeah, we talk about being a world leader, and what does that mean? That we've won the economic war and we've had more than everyone else, or that we actually work as a leader, as to take the advantages and power that we have and use them for the benefit of everyone. Anyhow, let me jump to another comment here. It's hard to imagine how we're going to get to net zero emissions in 30 years. So that's the goal of the Green New Deal. The things that the Green New Deal is calling for, like equal access to water as well as housing, is hard to see. America is so successful because of the stark contrast between the rich and the poor has made it seem normal. The profound cultural changes that will need to happen in order to achieve these goals are scary, because I feel like there is no way that those who benefit from our government the most will let it happen. I honestly feel like such sweeping changes will not be able to be made peacefully. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to show it this class. I'm actually, in case you've looked ahead on the syllabus, I don't have a film for week 10 yet. And in week 10 of English 22, I showed a film called Capital in the 21st Century, which is about how we got here with the free market system and the great inequity in the world. And that film rightly notes that this is worse, the inequity between the rich and the poor, than before, like the French Revolution, where there was so much hardship for so many people that there was an actual revolution, and not only in France. So, is it the point? I mean, the point is it I talk about this, and I believe that this can and should happen peacefully, that we can do something like enact a Green New Deal, or enact a lot of its policies by someone like Joe Biden, hopefully do so, that addresses these underlying problems, these social problems. I mean, it's an attempt at it. What I mean by that is it's an attempt to make sure that, everyone gets a decent wage, that, people are not trying to make a living at $7.25 an hour, that everyone has access to health care and to quality education, college. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to make sure that these social inequities are addressed and at least brought into a little more balance. But if we don't do that, people are rightfully, I think, concerned that that this just can't continue to go on. And there are people, I know, if you follow online, folks like ContraPoints. I know Natalie has two, which I think are just great. videos on free market economy and capitalism, and she is not at all convinced that this isn't going to end badly. I don't think it's going to end badly. I hope it's not going to end badly, but it does raise a question, right? If just a tiny bit few people are in control, and most of the world is suffering, will those people just stand for it? I'm not saying that we should enact the Green New Deal or a global Marshall Plan out of fear for the rest of the world. I think it's just the opposite, that we should do it for empathy. But this person rightly does note that, while we should do it, I think, historically it's been the case that, folks have not allowed these sort of injustices to happen. And that's a scary thought too. And it is one that we started the course with David Wallace Wells, saying that we could be entering an era of perpetual wars, something going on because of the climate crisis, indirectly or directly. It's a very scary thought. And, it seems far better to just go ahead and try to enact legislation that is fair to everyone, not just in the U.S., but across the planet. Yeah, again, I don't think we're gonna it's going to end badly, but it is something that people are talking about, and it's understandable why they are. Okay. Reminded of the intersectionality of environmentalism and the fight against injustice across the globe. Being the poorer communities are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. I think it's important to be reminded that in taking steps to battle climate change, we are also taking steps to battle systemic racism and socioeconomic injustices. As we have seen in the most recent days in the U.S., Texas is experiencing unusual and devastating snowstorm in which most of its occupants will not be prepared. Let me just go back to it's a great comment, but let me just focus on the beginning of it again. This notion of intersectionality is important, and that is, person rightly defines it correctly, that poor communities are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. And we should be reminded that in taking steps to battle climate change, we are taking steps to battle systemic racism and socioeconomic inequalities. So the idea of intersectionality is very simple. It's like, you have two issues and they kind of intersect, and if we did two circles, they would kind of overlap. And it's important to realize, and that's why this is an injustice issue, that things like systemic racism and socioeconomic insecurity, so people who are disadvantaged either because of racism or economics, these are related. So everything we've been talking about is related. The fact that, we don't have the problems that would come with the garment industry because we've offloaded them to another place. Well, good for us. We don't have to have our workers in those conditions, and we don't have to, be polluting our, environment. But that there's an intersection there because there's, systemic, socioeconomic unfairness. And I think the idea of racism applies here. I mean, look, and gender too, because as I've noted before, if you look who is actually working in those factories, it's for the most part people of color, and garment industry for the most part women. So there's an intersectionality there, right, of people of color. So if you are a person of color, if you are a woman, if you live in a place like Bangladesh, those all intersect, and you're kind of caught right in the middle of it all. And that's a problem. So one thing that this person rightly notes is when we address things like this, we can address these other issues as well. So let's just focus on the climate crisis and not pay attention to other stuff. Well, it's all related, and there's an intersection of it all here. And we have to talk about that. We need to address that too. We can't not address it, right? We have to. So in addressing it, it's like a win-win-win in that case. So, I mean, for people of color, for women, you happen to be women of color of a certain, you may be a woman of color and very wealthy, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about people who don't have very much money at all, and in Bangladesh who are, in starving conditions. So I think it's a great point to make here, and it's sort of the general point we've been making. But the idea of intersectionality, I think, is one of those important things that we need to mention, like the idea of degrowth that I brought up, and then folks latched onto here. So let's jump down here. I want to go through it. So there was more to that comment, and do read these, but let me just jump in to another comment so I don't not get that many by the end of the time here. So after hearing the differences between the U.S. and Bangladesh in terms of meat consumption, hunger, air travel, and cars, I was absolutely appalled. It's disheartening that Americans live such luxurious and extravagant lifestyles at the expense of places like Bangladesh. I think Ken's proposal of social, environmental, and climate justice is absolutely necessary in order to make, surely not my proposal, but what I brought attention to make the injustices that we have caused. However, when I found out that the previous administration, and that would be the Trump administration, had cut funding to Bangladesh by 2/3, I was extremely upset. I feel as if we Americans have a moral duty to support developing nations, especially since we use them to our advantage to produce our goods and allow us to live such extravagant lifestyles. This is why degrowth is necessary. So that is the reality of nationalism and the problem. So it's a fact. I'm not railing against Donald Trump here, but I'm just saying his administration in particular, because Bangladesh is an example where I keep coming back to, because I want to give a focus to it. I could just keep talking about bouncing around the rest of the world, and it would be easy to do, finding equally disturbing and appalling things that should, evoke our empathy. But staying with Bangladesh, Trump administration cut 2/3 of the funding that we send to Bangladesh. Why? Well, we're about America. America first. We care about America. Why do we care about Bangladesh? That's the argument, or we don't care that much about them. And that's that's what this person, notes. It's very disturbing and appalling. I think it's absolutely right, because, something to think about is, well, we should do more, but we have traditionally done something. And I think that's worth noting, because it suggests that both we have the mechanism to do it. In other words, we know how to give money to other countries in a way that is actually beneficial. But there is, in that very fact, the idea that we've known that that's a responsibility, and we've acted on that responsibility, and we've done something about that to do that. And I think that's something noteworthy. So it's not like this is something completely and entirely new to the United States. The United States has had that notion of being a global leader and has acted on it. But it varies a lot, right? So during the Trump administration, it hit a new recent low, and maybe during the Biden administration, it'll turn around. By the way, what's so fascinating about things like this, and fascinating is the word I want, but what's noteworthy about this, you probably knew nothing about this. Most people know nothing about this. We read headlines and all the things that are newsworthy. As topical things should be, like what's happening in Texas, sure. But there's all sorts of things like this that are happening all the time, and that the more you know, the more you'll realize the scope of issues like this. So it's a big deal, even though you may not have even heard of it. So let's continue on. This is not my comment, but this person's responding to someone else. You have mentioned climate justice in Bangladesh, and in Ken's lecture, you said the Green New Deal is mainly a U.S.-related document. However, this is a great observation here. One short line in the resolution captured my attention. It says that one of the Green New New Deal's goals requires promoting the international exchange of technology, expertise, products, funding, and services with the aim of making the United States the international leader in climate action and to help other countries achieve a Green New Deal. Yeah, what a great observation to make, and what a great little thing to throw in there. So again, promoting the international exchange of technology, in other words, sharing our technology, our expertise, our products, funding. What a clever way of saying that, promoting the international exchange of funding. In other words, giving other countries financial help that need it, and services, with the aim of making the United States the international leader on climate action and to help other countries achieve a Green New Deal. Well, first, great observation there. And so to our classmate, great observation for noting that, and to AOC and company who made that, great inclusion in the Green New Deal. Because, again, it's this sort of mostly national thing, but in there, thrown in, is that sort of, doorway open to all that we should promote Green New Deals everywhere. And an idea of, the values of the Green New Deal and how it helps people and all that should be something that we spread everywhere. And that we do that in specific ways, by sharing our technology, our knowledge, by helping with funding. It's a great idea, and it shows that even, in this era of nationalism trying to get it through, that is there. And as a doorway, I'm not even sure the metaphor I want, but it could expand up, right? I mean, that could, once we got serious about the Green New Deal, if we put it forth, then we would get serious about becoming what AOC and company call the international leader on climate action. What a great thing to be. And that's the argument, right? Remember way back at the beginning of the term, when you saw Leonardo DiCaprio being taken to task in India because we've not exercised leadership, and the Green New Deal is saying, it's coming right out and say we need to exercise just that kind of leadership in the rest of the world. It's a great inclusion and a great observation to pick it out. Okay, let's go down. Yeah, so this is a long comment, but it had multiple parts that are worth noting. But this here means that the drafters of this resolution, mainly AOC, is trying to put out an important proposal. AOC herself is a child of Puerto Rican immigrants, as mentioned in her video for this week's film assignments. I believe she is, and that's the when she's speaking from the future back to us. I believe that she is concerned about the people in her hometown of Puerto Rico, and thus believes the U.S. should try and help other parts of the world, and is actually a great proposal in itself. What's bad about being a world leader? Such a great thing. But pause on that for a moment. Because we've talked about, how AOC being a woman of color and all is great, because this is our government's traditionally been run by older white men, heteronormative, cisgendered men. But what difference does that make? Well, as this person, rightly notes here, because AOC's family comes from Puerto Rico, she is aware of these sort of disparities. Puerto Rico, economically isn't as bad as Bangladesh, but on the other hand, Puerto Rico is, the standard of living there is nowhere near Santa Barbara, or most of the U.S. on average, rest of the U.S. on average. So how does that work? Well, it means that she has an insight that, a wealthy white man just is not going to have. She's going to, in a first-hand kind of way. So for her, it wouldn't necessarily be like an emotional act of empathy to sort of be able to put herself in the shoes of someone else. She's aware of those shoes. She knows people like it. She's up close to it and can see it. And I think that's one of the great values of someone like AOC coming into a position of power because, historically, there's been one kind of nexus of power and other people have been sort of cut off from that. But being brought into that position of power allows her to address issues that wouldn't have gone addressed. And I say that because they haven't gone addressed. But let me go back to this comment, because this one goes on to another good point. As far as I'm concerned, that's what the U.S. Was always trying to do in the past century, and that is to be a world leader. Helping other countries to develop sustainably would certainly help U.S. get a good reputation globally. Now, this is actually what my home country, China, has been doing in recent years. At least that's what I've heard and read about. The One Belt, One Road initiative proposed by the Chinese government, and this was a little while back, is focusing on helping developing countries in Asia and Africa grow sustainably, and the Chinese government encouraged Chinese corporations in the field of renewable energy to invest in overseas projects. For example, in Pakistan, Chinese corporation has invested in helping construct a utility-scale photovoltaic plants with loans offered by Chinese bank. The plan is estimated to cover the basic needs for electricity for 200,000 households, incredibly small portion of the entire population, but definitely crucial development of Pakistan. As for Bangladesh, China has also invested in many infrastructure and energy projects that has allowed the Bangladeshi economy to grow more rapidly. Yeah. As I've stated in another comment a few weeks ago, to really cope with the issue of climate change, one must also have to deal with poverty. The U.S. should and is totally capable of offering help and would make a huge difference. What a great comment. And, my theme, I keep saying how wonderful it is we have such a diverse group of people in this class, So I just argued why we need a diverse group of people running our government. But this is great. And to underscore that, so the example the person gave, Pakistan, is a good one. But China has been enormously influential in think how this person phrased it here. Yeah, Asia and Africa. And I think that's right, especially if we think, Asia in a broader sense in the Indian subcontinent and all. And then Africa as well. And while the United States, has had, just like with Pakistan, with Bangladesh, we've always had some sort of role helping, not like China has. I mean, China has become powerful and wealthy and, it's quickly becoming the most powerful and the wealthiest country on the planet. But with that, they realized comes a responsibility, and it would be easy to just close its borders as well. I mean, look, China benefits by it. We benefit by it. I mean, they would benefit by the technology exchange and making loans and all. And we always have to be careful that, how that's done so it is equitable. But the spirit of which this is being done in China and the scale that it's being done in places like Africa, again, great example with Pakistan, but you could give so many examples all over, and like country after country after country in Africa, where China is involved there. With everything, I mean, you could always draw attention to problems too, but it's absolutely the right spirit and the right thing to do and to take on that job. And I don't know how to put it, with the desire to be, the desire to put America first and think just about America and to close our borders means that, in a way, we've abdicated our role as being the world leader, and countries like China, and not doing it motivated by the idea that we can beat the United States now. It's not that at all. It's that somebody has to step up and do it, and China is stepping up and doing what we should be doing. And from the point of view of patriotism and being an American, that should make us kind of sad, right? That, we want to say how great we are and how, America first and all, but America is, had this role for, as this person notes in the comment, for like a century. And now we're just, letting that go. I don't think it has to be a competition, by the way. I don't think it's like, who's the greatest giver? Wouldn't that be a great competition, though, if the nations of the world all got together and say, well, we can do more for this country than you can. Oh, no, we can do more. That would be great. It's kind of just the opposite. But it is worthwhile to note what's happening in the rest of the world regarding this, because, in other words, this whole class has been focusing on the Green New Deal and what the U.S. could do with the Global Marshall Plan. Well, other countries are thinking the same way, but actually doing it. So, great comment, really useful comment. So this is making a reply. I think your views on America's moral duty to support developing countries, especially given greater privilege Americans have, makes absolute sense. So from what I have been learning in this course, climate change is a human issue that requires a human effort in order to effectively reach solutions that could mitigate this crisis. Just pausing on that for a moment. Yeah, that is the theme of the course, but this is yet another example, right? That if we think it's all about, wind turbines and solar, obviously important. I always have to put that disclaimer in, obviously important, but suddenly you realize, the way our government works, the way that we exchange, technology and help other countries and help funding, the way that other countries do that, the way that China is now doing that as well. This is all a big part of what needs to be done here, which is why it is such a big deal. I mean, it's not like we could just have a silver bullet that Elon Musk says, and I think sort of implies in the Leonardo DiCaprio film Before the Flood, you remember they're walking into that gigafactory in Nevada, and he says, if there are just 100 of these, we could supply all the energy for the planet. And it's like, poof, there it is, a magic bullet, silver bullet that solves everything. Doesn't solve everything. I mean, there's still all these other issues, profound issues that we have to address. It's big and it's onerous, but as people have noted, even in our comments today, but look how we can address other issues, racism, systemic injustice regarding, economic differences and all this, we can address at the same time, and we can make a better world, not just one, free of the ravages of the worst of climate change, which would come if we don't do anything, but a better world in general. But let me get back to this comment. Even if the United States somehow mitigates the climate change, that does not mean the entire problem is suddenly eliminated worldwide. Many of our actions affected countries with significantly less resources than us, and as such, they may be unable to fix the issues the same way a country like the U.S. would be able to. It feels very unfair to these countries if we just let them clean up the mess that we've contributed to making. As such, I do agree that we have to play a role in making sure developing countries have strong environmental laws and help them when they are suffering the consequences, because such actions may be the only means such countries would have to alleviate themselves of the problem. It would even directly benefit the rest of the world to make laws to prevent the production of stuff so that as to not destroy the environment, as reducing production would reduce demand and eliminate temptations to stay trapped in a cycle where progress is undermined. Yeah, I think this is absolutely right. And I think the person's phrase here, it feels very unfair to these countries if we just let them clean up the mess that we've contributed to making. It really does, and the notion that we can think, nationalistic, closed ways without realizing that we've already created a mess. I mean, look at the mess in Bangladesh, we could look at it even the bigger picture. Why is there that sort of, inequity to begin with? But then, we saw just the tip of the iceberg with the true cost when we saw the Rana Plaza disaster. That was an extraordinary moment, and it was obviously horrible. Over 1,000 people died. But as someone, one of the comments, the person rightly noted that, 5,000 people dying a year there and all the devastation, why are we reading about this? Why aren't we there on the ground? Well, that is happening. I mean, the devastation that's happening, and even that, we could say, well, those floods where 40% of the country, was flooded. We should talk about those. But, what about the day-to-day, aside from any particular horrific event, whether it's a horrible flood or the Rana Plaza disaster, but on the day-to-day level where 40 million people are starving in that country? I mean, that, this is a mess that we've created in part through our actions, and certainly with the climate, impact that's going to happen. With that, we're as this person puts, we contributed to making it. So, we have that obligation to do it. It just, and the person's right. I mean, how does it feel? Quoting the person here, it feels very unfair to those countries if we just let them clean up the mess. And I think I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of this being a justice issue, I think that's it. It just seems very unfair to allow that to happen. I think I'm going to end on that. I'm looking over at my timer. I have the timer on my phone going, and actually getting close to being able to finish this within an hour if I push the button at the right time. So yeah, this is an injustice problem too, and as demoralizing and all as it is, it also then, what's so great about this is that it's an opportunity too, right? So if this were all about windmills and solar, that would be great. But that we could put it in and we'd solve everything. But if it was that kind of problem, which it isn't, but think about it. What would that mean? Well, we switched from one kind of power plant to another, and that was great. And then the planet moves on. But it's not a problem like that. But in a way, as overwhelming as it can be because it has all these other parts, you can't just give one or two silver bullets, solar and wind, to resolve it. But it's also an opportunity to address these other issues, social justice issues, racism, and economic inequalities, and all of it. And that is, I think what's so exciting in a positive sense, in that, well, we can address all of it. So I mean, I keep using this phrase win-win-win or win-win-win-win-win or whatever, but it can be, because again, putting in solar cells doesn't solve anything but switching from one kind of electricity production to another. But we have an opportunity to address a range of other things, and it will all work to the benefit of the planet. If we reduce emissions somewhere, anywhere on the planet, it works to our benefit, because we will not experience climate change as bad as it could be here in the US if we curtail emissions somewhere else, and it helps people on the rest of the planet. So although again it's big and it's scary and it's a little overwhelming, the plus side is that it all makes for a better world, both in the sense of the planetary climate, but a world better for our species and people who are suffering, and people who are suffering in a different kind of way, I guess. The American way of life doesn't quite make us as happy as we think. So we're gonna address the issue of happiness coming up. But okay, so there, I did it. I blew my opportunity to stop a lecture before an actual hour. Sorry about that. I went over. So one of these lectures, I'm going to stop at like 57 minutes. But I guess today wasn't that lecture. Okay, so have a great week, and I'll see you with the next deep dive.